G'day guys, and welcome to a new tutorial. In this video I'm going to be showing you how to create a realistic ice scene. So this is the finished result that you can see right here. So as you can imagine, this sort of thing could be used for, I don't know what you guys are going to use it for. Maybe like a drink commercial with like a beer bottle or something resting in an ice bucket, or maybe like some cool text intro with like the text made out of ice or something. I don't know, whatever you want to do. I reckon it'd be awesome. But the basis for this tutorial is walking you through some of the material settings. That's a big one, setting all that up. And the other one that's really big is also setting up the displacements. Displacements, for those of you that don't know, are, how the basically texturizing the geometry of the object, if that makes sense. So these ice cubes are essentially a cube which has had displacements applied to it. We're going to do a little bit of sculpting to try and melt some of the ice cubes down and create a generally interesting looking scene. As well as that, also going to be doing a little bit of compositing, adding the defocus node, color balance, yada yada yada, you get the picture. So let's go ahead and open up a new scene in Blender right now. Just get this started. And I'll set up this display keys tool so you can see what I'm pressing. Alright, make everything big. Awesome. Okay, cool. So, before we start, I reckon it's always a good idea to have a look at some reference photos. So, this right here is an image that I pulled off Google Images. I don't know who owns it. It was like some wallpaper or something, so I'm hoping nobody sues me over it for showing it here. But anyway, this is sort of the idea for this scene. So we're not going to be creating like some exactly smooth looking ice cubes like this. The ones we're going to go for are kind of like a frosted mix, so kind of a little bit like this one here. There are many different types of ice cubes out there. Here is another one. Let me just make that bigger. So you can see this one's got little tiny bubbles, and I'm actually pretty certain this one is actually a 3D render as well, because they look way too clean and perfect. But anyway, I don't really need to show you how to Google something, so you can have a look at reference images. Okay, so first thing we're going to do is we're going to take this cube right here, and in edit mode, I'm just going to hold down Control and move it along the Z axis like that. Okay, so with that now there, by the way, the reason we're doing that is so that now when we scale it, it scales it off the base. So it just comes in handy later on. And what I want to do is I want to make this look smooth, okay? So, rounded edges and things like that. And you could do that by adding a bevel like that, but, that's very low poly and looks quite awful. Or you could add a subsurf modifier. And when you add a subsurf modifier, like this one right here, you can see that it makes it too smooth, like, like a ball shaped, basically. So what we want to do is create some more definition to it. So the way you can do that is by adding some more loop cuts. So if you hit Control R, it will bring up this little purple line here. And then if you use the mouse wheel, you can create two lines. Okay, and you can see what happens when you do that. It creates kind of, more refined edge. So I'm going to create two more along the vertical axis and also along the Y axis, like that. Okay, so now we got essentially a rounded looking cube. I'm going to turn on smooth shading. And now let's just set up the scene. So with that camera there selected, if I hit Control Alt number pad 0, it has snapped the camera to the view that I was from, which is the front view. And I'm just going to position things, whatever, about there. And I'm going to add a ground plane. So just to explain things, what I'm going to do is essentially make it so that the ground plane is lit up, okay? So I want it to be like pure white plane, and then these ice cubes are going to be refracting that ground plane. So that's essentially where it's going to get all of its lighting from. The cubes themselves aren't really going to be affected by any lighting at all. It's going to essentially be, it's a transparent object. If you found like a transparent piece of film and then you shone a light on it, you're not going to see much of an effect. So that's essentially what's going to be happening here. Anyway, so With that said, I'm going to turn this default lamp here into a sun lamp, make it an energy value of 2. Like I said, it's going to be quite powerful, make it solid white looking ground. And I'm going to set the rotation for that sun to be pointing directly downwards. Okay, so I'm just setting all those to 0. And if you really wanted to, you can hit Alt-G, and then you can place it directly in the center of the scene. But it doesn't matter, honestly, because it can be anywhere. And I'm going over the top here. Anyway, let's, if we give this a render now, you can probably imagine what it's going to look like. It is a solid cube against a white floor. Very unimpressive. So, let's get into the materials for the ice cube. Okay, so this is something a lot of people, get puzzled with, setting up a realistic ice material. So let's get into it. First thing we're going to do is I'm going to turn the specularity down. So something about that, like 0.1. And I've actually, this is kind of, you can toss up and, have a bit of a go at, which one works best. But I either turn on Wall Dis O, which is something I never use, but it just gives you really, really sharp looking reflections. You can't, you can just see that kind of thin line across the top there. That's kind of what it looks like. Or you can just set this to the normal Couture one and then just turn the hardness all the way up. It's really up to you. Yeah, anyway, have a bit of experiment. That's not really important specularity, so let's move on. Big one is transparency. So by default, it's set to Z transparency, which renders quite quickly, but we obviously want a little bit more control. So turn on ray trace, and you can see you get all these extra options here. But don't worry, we're actually not going to be touching hardly any of them. Biggest one we're going to do is set the alpha to 0. Now that is essentially making our object transparent. There you go. Oh, look at that. It is an invisible cube. Cool. This one right here is the index of refraction. Okay, now that's kind of, I think it's like a scientific thing. You can actually Google it and find out the index refraction values, and you can find out, the refraction value of glass, I think is 1.1. The refraction value of ice and water is 1.3. I think 1.31 is actually kind of the most accurate, or maybe 0.312 or something, but you're not going to notice any difference. Anyway, something around about 1.3 is going to get you some accurate looking refractions. Okay, so that is essentially what it looks like right now, which actually looks kind of funky. Maybe if I just point it up a little bit, you might be able to see a bit better. Anyway, there you go. That's that's a little bit better. So you can see essentially what it's doing there. It's kind of bending the light and it is refracting it. So that's essentially what it's doing. And we're not going to touch any of these other values here. I mean, we'll touch the depth later on. Another big one you might want to change is gloss. Gloss basically just makes blurry looking refractions, refractions, as you can see in that little preview there. If I give that a render, you can see how that looks. If I just turn this up a bit, just so that you guys can see it yourself. I found that when I was making my ice scene, the blurry looking refractions didn't look all that good, so I just canned it. Plus, blurry anything like blurry reflections or refractions really increase the render time. So just keep a note of that. Anyway, with that now set up, let's get into something else. One thing you might notice if you have a look at some real... this, I think here, I'm just going to show you this. Pretty sure this is a 3D render, actually. I shouldn't be showing you a reference photo of a 3D image, but you can see there's bubbles in the ice cube, okay? It's not something you notice if you're not looking for it, but look at any, reference photo of an ice cube, and you'll probably notice that there is bubbles inside it. So you could do this by making them by hand. So what we would do is we would add an icosphere like this, turn the subdivision down to 1. The reason I use icospheres, by the way, is if it's a tiny object that doesn't require much geometry, icospheres create really good low poly looking spheres. Now if I set that to smooth, okay, so it looks like this, okay. If I now kind of, shrunk that down a bit, put it in about there, and let's make it the exact same material as that cube, so just hit Control L, then materials. And if I render that, you can see we have this ugly looking shape here. One thing to note also is that these they got this big black splotch right there. Now the reason for that is underneath the transparency options, you've got something which is called depth. And basically that is how many, as far as I know, like the number of refractions that can occur between objects before it turns to black, basically. Now, our scene is going to be full of ice cubes, so we need to turn this depth around about 10, I think, or 12. On that note, let's just give it a save whilst we're here. Anyway, if we render this now, you'll see we have this. Now, that doesn't look all that impressive, and you're right, it's not impressive at all. Now, if you wanted to create, these little bubbles by hand, you're welcome to, but I have a much better way. Okay. What I'm going to do is create a plane. Okay, I'm putting this plane in our cube right here, okay? And I'm going to add a particle system to this plane. Set the particles to hair type, which basically means you can use any object where the particles are, and then change it to object, then set it to duplicate object. And my girlfriend is here to deliver some tea. Say hello.
Hello. Enjoy.
Okay. So, so I'm changing the rendering options to object and then icosphere. And you can see where the particles are now those spheres, basically. So what I can do, I put that back in there, is if I go into edit mode and then subdivide that plane a few times like this, then select that middle vertice, turn on proportional editing, and then change that to random. If I now scale upwards like that, you can see that it's turning our plane here into this ugly kind of spiky looking thing. However, you'll notice the those little icospheres are now distributed all kind of like in a cloud type shape inside the cube. And that's exactly what we want. Now, if we rendered it, you would see that we've now got this little spiky thing inside, which doesn't look all that great. So underneath the rendering options of the particle system, uncheck emitter, and we now have those little bubbles all showing up by themselves. Now we're going to have to change a few things. So turn on advanced in the particle settings. Turn down the size of them to, it all depends on however big this sphere here is. So if I put that behind the camera, something around about that should be fine. Turn up the randomized size, that's very important. And also turn on random distribution as well. So if we render that now, we should see this. So that looks quite cool, I think you'll agree. It looks not bad. In fact, really, you know how when you look inside an ice cube, sometimes you'll see kind of like a cloudy, almost like, I don't know, almost like hairs kind of thing, really looks exactly like a cloud. That's essentially really, really tiny little bubbles which are forming that cloud shape. At least that's my understanding of it. So, you could really turn up the amount of those if you want, but we're going to leave it. One thing I will do, though, is I'm going to create a few big bubbles. So I'm going to add an icosphere here, make it a subdivision of 2 to give it a little bit more, more poly, so it looks a bit better. And I'm just going to make it kind of oval shaped like that. And then I'm going to make another one and just make it a little bit smaller. So something like that. All right. And set that to be the materials, like so. And now if we render that, well, it doesn't look that great because you kind of got these awful refractions, but it will look, hopefully, a lot better when it renders. Anyway, you can sort of see the gist of that. Okay, cool. So now we have got one cube set up. Okay. Now comes the tricky part, and that is creating some variations to this ice cube. And before I continue, I'm just going to shut the door so there's not much noise. Okay, very professional tutorial. Okay, so just so it's smoother in the 3D viewport, I'm just turning down the subdivisions. Okay, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to duplicate that, like that. And going into sculpting mode, I am basically going to add some variations to our cube here. So if you turn on draw mode, set it to subtract, we can slowly start to melt away at our ice cube, okay? Now, there's not really any sort of strict guidelines on how to do this. Let's just turn up the subdivisions again. But yeah, it's a matter of trial and error. Like, I've spent the last 2 days basically just doing this, trying to create some realistic looking ice cubes, and it's really like, it's trial and error at the best of times. It's, you know, it's just one of those things you just have to play around with to until you get something that works. And so I'm just slowly shrinking it down. You want to get some nice, interesting patterns if you can. One thing to also note is if you have a look at our original scene here, not that one, this one, you'll notice that the ice cubes are at the front here are quite low, and the reason for that is that the camera is almost at eye level to this main big cube in the background. So you want to make some cubes that are, you know, quite low to the ground. So that is something to keep a note of. Actually, you know what? That one looks really ugly. All right, you know what I'm going to do, because I've just realized this now, actually, is if we set these subsurfs to, let's say, 2, and hit apply, then add another subsurf modifier, and set that to 2, now you can see we have more vertices to play with. So if I sculpt this now, there we go. Got a little bit more control over everything. I don't know why, I only just realized this now as I'm doing the tutorial. Should have realized that before, but anyway. It's one of those things. Okay, that's not bad. Let's add another one. Oh, not that one. Hit apply, add another subsurf like this. Alright, so I mean, you can create as many as you like. I'm probably going to just go with 4 or 5. I just want to get some that have got some nice looking shapes to them. Because, you know, as I've explained, it's really going to affect how the scene looks. So if I would recommend looking at reference photos of ice cubes, because that is really going to affect how your scene looks, basically. And just so that the bubbles inside are, you know, not jutting out of the side, I'm just going to do that right there using proportional editing. And let's create just one more. Hit apply, subsurf. So I'm doing that so that I still have, you know, not too many vertices to play with. But yeah, you can also, it just gives you a little bit more control than you did previously. All right, so let's just scale it down. And sculpt again, okay. So there's a number of different tools you can use for sculpting. I usually just kind of like mash the buttons over here, like, oh, I think I'll try this one, and I go, oh no, that one's rubbish. Let's try grab, and then it's just, yeah, I don't really know all the. I'm not a big sculptor, as you could probably guess. The way I'm doing things here is pretty horrendous. But yeah, anyway, you get the picture. Let's just add a little bit more detail to this one right here, because it's looking a little bit lumpy, like someone just threw it there and it went. So give it a little bit more character. There we go. Yeah, that looks really weird. These look like kind of Play-Doh objects, not really anything of substance. I'm going to smooth it out a little bit. Just a little bit. Alright, that's not bad. Alright. If we give this a render right now, probably won't look all that fantastic. Just as a word of warning. It's alright, I suppose. What we're going to do now is we're going to add some displacement. Okay, so displacement are basically affecting the shape of the geometry very quickly by using textures. Okay, so it's the lazy man's way of modeling. So if you wanted to, you could go in there and sculpt away and add some little random things, or we can just use a displacement. And displacements give you a lot more control because you can go back, you can turn them off, you can change the effect, etc., etc. So I really love them, and I use them in almost every single one of my tutorials. So to add a displacement, first of all, we need a texture. So with the ice cube selected, go to the materials, then texturing options, remove the default texture, and we're going to set up this this first texture here, and I'm going to call it big because we're going to be using more than one displacement. Now uncheck the texture because we don't want that texture to actually apply to the material of the cube. We just want it to affect, just essentially use the name in the displacement. Now I'm going to change the size of it to a 0.75 and turn the depth of it to 0. I'm now going to add another displacement, and this one is going to be, you guessed it, small. For this one, I'm going to set that to 0.5, depth at 2. Now jumping back over to displacement, I'm going to enable big like that, and you can see what it has done. It has now just turned this into a cotton candy looking thing. So I'm going to turn the strength of that down to something about that. Should be fine. Now add another displacement and make this one small, and I'm going to turn that down to about a 0.14. Okay, so if we just turn up subsurf, you can see the effect that it's having right there. So if I give this a quick render now, you can see how our little cube in the middle there looks. Doesn't look too bad. Now we want to apply that same these same modifiers here to all of our other ones over here. Now, this is something I've learned actually very recently from somebody that's in the Nature Academy. They just mentioned this in the comments, and I never realized you could do it. If you select a number of objects like this, you can apply materials very quickly by hitting Control L and then selecting materials. The other thing you can do is you can apply modifiers. So if we enable a modifier like that, you can see that it has now applied that the same modifiers right there over the tops of our other ones right here. Now these ones are supposed to be set to 2, so we need to turn those down because they're too much for what we've got on the screen at the moment. Actually, I might set that, set it to 1. Because you'll remember that we applied the subsurf modifiers for these ones, but not for our cube there. So that's why we're changing it right now, if that makes sense. Okay, cool. So now let's give that a quick render for the rest of them, and I think it should be looking a little bit more interesting. Yep, it is not bad at all. Okay, cool. So now comes another fun part, is creating the rest of the scene. So this is, let's just move that out of the way. It's just annoying me. Okay, behind the camera, there we go. This is just essentially where we just grab those ice cubes that we've already created and we just duplicate them and we create the rest of the scene. Now you can, if you wanted to, use like a particles, to distribute them across it, but you won't get much control over it and they'll be overlapping and it would just generally just look, I don't know, just lazy. So the way to do it is to essentially just duplicate and rearrange as I am doing right now. So it is a little bit time consuming, but you know what? You're an artist, so no complaining. You should be loving it. If you're not loving it, then why are you doing it? So I tell myself when I'm not loving it. Okay. So we want to make sure that the camera can see our main cube there in the background, because that's going to be our focus point basically. So, and on that note, I'm just going to, let's move that out of the way. I'm going to grab this main cube and rotate it like that, and then rotate it like that. And you can actually do the same with these. They don't have to be, stuck on the floor the way they are. They can be placed at any angle. Doesn't matter. Alright, and this one here, which is nice and flat, I'm going to use that one quite a lot, I think. Alright, let's just move that around a bit. A couple over there. Let's put you in here. Now, there's something else you could also do to distribute these, and I do it as part of this tutorial, but it's kind of something that deserves a tutorial on its own. That is using the game engine to drop the objects onto a plane so that they are, yeah, basically placed there. So, I mean, you can do it that way if you like. But yeah, like I said, it's a little bit fiddly to set up, and it's, yeah, pretty much worthy of a tutorial on its own. So I'll save that for another day, I think. For now, you can just do it by hand. What is going on here? I'm just trying to smooth out these vertices, and they are not liking it. I fixed it. Nice. Okay. I'm going to give a little bit of depth to it. That doesn't make any sense. It's weird because you can see the geometry that we've got right here, but there's also, you got to keep a mind of, is the displacement modifiers also having an effect on it. So it might not look exactly as you had planned. Anyway, that's not too bad. Because this one, I don't know, that looks just really weird. That might be something we just throw in the background or something, but, you know. Anyway. Okay, so I'm moving that around. And if you're really lazy, like me, it's not really lazy, I mean, it's just time saving, and you should really be looking at time saving methods. You can just grab a bunch of them like that, and then just, yeah, delete the ones you don't want, and just create a nice, nice clearing in front of the camera. So I have a feeling this render's gonna not look too good. I should say that I've kind of like rehearsed this tutorial about 7 times, I think. And every time I do it, it gets me a different result. So it's kind of like I'm just like playing Wheel of Fortune or something. I'm just like spinning the wheel and just hoping that it lands on something that looks decent. Because I thought Blender was going to crash then. Yeah, it's just when you're playing with refractions, as we are, it's really unpredictable as to how the render's going to turn out. So I wouldn't be surprised if half the comments for this tutorial are, why does my scene look horrible? Why doesn't my scene look like yours? Just keep playing with it, guys. Play with the shape of the ice cubes and the order in which they are on the screen. So that's pretty much the advice I can give you. Anyway, let's give this a render. I'm going to set the background to be solid black, and let's hope it looks okay. Let's hope. Okay, it looks quite hideous, doesn't it? The main reason it's looking terrible is that I think the displacement's a little bit over the top for these ice cubes, and also probably behind it there's too many ice cubes. So what I'm going to do is eliminate a few of these, push them around a bit, tell them what to do, show them who's boss. Okay, you can go. Remove the bubbles from that one as well. Sometimes the bubbles inside can cause, you know, over the top looking refractions, as we saw before. So I'm removing a few of them that I don't like, as the dictators do throughout history. Alright, I'm just... Whoa! Yep. Like that. That's how you do it. So I'm really hoping that this looks good, because otherwise I might have to redo the tutorial, and that's never fun, you know? So let's go. Let's go. Okay, it's an improvement. There's not too many squiggly things, but we've got these kind of ugly black slug looking things. The other thing to note also is the camera angle as well. Like how much white you've got on the screen is going to affect the refractions. So keep a note of that. So keep kind of a nice contrast of the sky, the background, as well as the plane, the whiteness of the plane. So those are a few things to keep a note of. I might just push that to be there. Okay, and this thing is ugly. Let's just smooth that out a bit. Okay. Okay, now let's hope this looks a little bit better. I've removed some of the cubes. Okay, so you can see what I mean when I say it's kind of random and annoying as to how the refraction turns out. So I'm just going to try raising the camera now and hopefully try and clear up some of the squiggliness. I think also possibly the displacement amount is too high. So I'm turning them down a little bit. Like so, and hoping that's going to have an effect. Because, yeah, some of these, yeah, we're just looking way too squiggly looking. Which is a technical term for horrible looking. Okay, so it's still looking quite bad. Let me just try something else. Smooth. In the past, I've also like changed the index of refraction, which I wouldn't recommend. Try and keep it, you know, as real as possible for like the real world. But, you know, this is, it's looking quite nasty, as you can see. So what I might have to do is just remove some of these. Find one that actually looks okay. Maybe just grab one of these, this cube here. Scale that over a little bit, drop that in there. Maybe scale it down a touch. Push that over here, rotate it a bit. Oh, that's another thing I can teach you. A lot of people always use the rotate tool, which is, you know, you hit R and it rotates along that axis. But if you want to rotate it along another axis, you have to move the camera and then rotate like that. Another cool one is if you hit R twice, then you can actually use what's called trackball, and that's where you can rotate along whatever axis you like. So that doesn't work well for everything, of course, but for objects like this where it doesn't matter which way is up, and you just want to just quickly, randomly distribute things, it works quite well. So that's why I'm using it right now. Anyway, I might push this one to the front a little bit more, something like that. Okay, let's hope this one looks good. I can't believe I've only just realized this. Okay, this is really annoying. I'm just telling you this now. Anyway, you'll notice in this render here, the shadows are black. Okay, they shouldn't be black. Something we should have done at the beginning. Let's give a material to our plane at the bottom there. Let's turn off the specularity. But the most important one is underneath shadows. You need to turn on receive transparent or else you'll get black shadows. Okay, so that's probably part of the reason I'm having this problem. Yeah, you can see the scene is looking a lot nicer now. So, yeah, something to keep a note of. Make sure that you turn on receive transparent on the object that the shadows are being cast onto, not on the ice cubes themselves, if that makes sense. But we also probably need to do that for the ice cubes as well. So let's do that. Underneath shadow, turn on receive transparent. And hopefully that will also clear up a little bit of the problem as well. I'm just going to quickly drop in just a few ice cubes in the middle here as well. Maybe just that one. Oh, it looks a bit ugly. All these ice cubes look really ugly. And if I had time, I didn't want to waste yours, I'd remodel them, but I've already wasted enough of it, I think, so... Alright, let's hope this one looks half decent. Actually, let me just remove this one in the background. You have to keep a note of whatever is behind the ice, because if there's too much behind it, it's just going to look all white and squiggly and horrible. So, yeah, make sure you keep a note of that. Anyway, let's hope this one looks good. Okay, so it's looking quite decent. One thing I'm going to show you that can help add a little bit more randomness to the scene is if we select, you'll notice these ones down here, that one there, and this one here, the reflections aren't cooperating, or refractions, I should say. So, what we can do is we can completely blur it out, and that's not using this gloss function here. What I'm going to do instead is add a new texture to our material, making sure it's unchecked. We don't actually want to show it up in the render. And I'm going to set the size of it to 0.15 leave the depth as 2, and I'm going to call this one very small. Okay, very, very small displacement. So if with this object here selected, I'm going to change the small texture to be very small, and you can see the effect that it's having. And I'm going to do the same for this one over here, very small, and it's essentially just going to make it look frosted. That's the idea with it. Let's see, possibly, I don't know if any others could benefit from it really. Maybe that one there is looking a little bit too big, a little bit too weird. It's not fitting in. Does not play well with others, as it would say on the Ice Cube's report card. Alright, let's set that to very small, see how that looks. Might want to turn down the displacements as well. I mean, this is really, I'm just kind of rendering it and going back and forth, and you're wondering, geez, Andrew, did you practice this at all before you started? Yep, I have. I almost didn't want to do the tutorial because I knew, like, every time I rehearse it, it's just random. It's like I said, it's spinning the wheel of fortune and hoping that it looks okay. So if your scene looks horrible, only thing I can suggest to you is play around with the settings, play around with the camera angle. If I point the camera angle, if I go up and then point it down like that, I'm going to get completely different looking render because you're essentially just changing the way the refractions are appearing on your screen. So it's something to keep a note of. Another thing to note also is the size of the plane. So if I turn this, shrink that down and make it so it's like that, then you're going to get a lot more black in your scene, as I'll just show you right now. If I set this render buffer like this is just going to show you an example of how important it is to keep a note of the environment, because the environment in a way is more important than, you know, the modeling of the ice cubes and things like that. Yeah, that really does play a huge role in how the ice is going to look. So that's why I don't know if I said it at the beginning, but if you're using this tutorial to create kind of like an ice cube sitting on a bench or something like that, you're going to have to do some completely different things. Anyway, so this is what it looked like before and now after. Okay, now that's just by shrinking the plane. Okay, so you can see the effect that, you know, the plane actually has on the scene. So again, don't take it lightly. You should keep a note of the environment. Very, very, very important. Okay, so I'm just filling in these areas at the front. Almost ready, I think. Almost. So it's looking pretty icy, I think. Let's just give it another quick render. Okay, cool. You can see how it's looking now. It's looking essentially like ice, finally. It's not perfect, but you know, you've seen the struggles it's been to get to this point. But yeah, I mean, a little bit more fiddling around and, you know, fixing a couple of these ones down there is going to fix that. I'm just going to show you now quickly how to do the, you know, the final image, get to that, so that we can wrap up the tutorial. So what we're going to be doing is in the compositor, we're going to be adding some depth of field. We're going to be changing the color of the ice, giving it a bit of a blue tint, and also adding some glow to it. So for the depth of field, we need to set a focal point for the camera, very important, and we want the focal point to be this object right here. The name of the object is cube, because that was the first one that we added, so that's why it's got that nice clean name. So with the camera selected, underneath depth of field, let's just change that name to cube. And if you turn on limits, then you should see that yellow marker there placed at whereabouts the object is you want it to be focused on. You can also just not use that and then just change the distance using like that, but you know, it's up to you. Anyway, okay, once you've set that up, you do need to re-render it, so make sure you do that right now. And we're ready to jump into the compositor. So easiest way to do that is to hit Control left arrow, and that's going to take you straight to the compositor. And I'm just going to remove these because we don't need that. So turning on use nodes, first thing we're going to do is add a defocus node. Okay, let's drop that in there. Connect the image to the yellow input and the Z input to the Z output of the render layer. It's a mouthful. And for the backdrop, we're just, check backdrop so we can see it. And we want to add that viewer node to our defocus node so we can see the effect it's having. So first thing you need to do is turn on use the buffer. In my opinion, that should already be checked whenever you add that in. Anyway, that's a whole nother argument. And we're going to turn the f-stop, which is the all-important kind of, how much DOF or depth of focus, whatever you want to call it, depth of field, is applied to it. So I'm going to set that to around about 20, which is a little bit extreme, but because it's quite a small-looking scene, it's kind of appropriate. The smaller your scene is, like how tiny the objects are, the more depth of field there generally is. And if you want that kind of noisy effect, then turn preview on, or if you don't, turn it off and you'll get a more smoother look. If I set that to 10, you can see you get even more out of focusness. Anyway, you can play around with that. I'll set mine to 15. Next thing I want to do is add a little bit of glow to our ice. So easiest way to do that, add a blur node, connect that in there. And I want to change this to fast Gaussian. And normally, like I used to always just use like these values here, just change those ones. But that will change and it will affect like whenever you change the resolution of the scene. So if I change that to 100% later on, I would have to come back in here and bump up these values or turn them down or whatever. So, instead, check relative. And what you can do there is you can change the percentage, okay? And that's very important. So if I set this to 10 and 10, make sure you turn on X as well so that it gets the correct aspect ratio. Can never work out if it's supposed to be Y or X. I don't properly understand it myself. But you get the gist of it. Let's set that to, let's go 20. 2020, something, no, maybe 10. Anyway, now we're going to add a mix node. Drop that in there. No, drop the output from the blur node into the bottom one of the mix node, and then the output from the defocus into the top. And we're going to be changing the blend mode to be add because we're adding white over the top of our scene. And now if I want to turn the blur or the glow amount up, I just increase that factor amount to 1, which is maximum, or you can even go further if you want and just, it's the rapture. Or instead, I'm going to set this to around about, say, 0.1 or 0.07, I don't know. And then, you know what, we're going to bump up the blur again. Woohoo! Okay, oh, we're having lots of fun, aren't we? Whew, tell you what. Let's add now a color balance node, finally. Because the scene looks very boring. It looks very plain. Because it is black and white. And that does not look good. Except if you lived a long time ago when movies were made. So we want to make it look kind of like it has like a blue tinge to it, okay? So if you remember our reference image that I showed you at the beginning there, you can see the ice has a slight blue tinge to it. Now you could add that in the materials or you can add it in the compositor later on. And I figured, you know, after experimentation, you're not going to get any kind of benefits from adding it to the material yourself. It's not going to affect it at all, and once it's rendered, you can't change it. So better just to do it in the compositor. So this right wheel here is going to affect the white values. So if I set that up like that, you could see that it is now affecting those white values, like so. Actually, maybe it's gamma, gain, lift. I can never remember which one it's supposed to be. Anyway, I think that's right. Yeah, the middle one is the midtones. That one is the highlights. Pretty sure that's how the world works. Anyway, something around about that. Yeah, I think that's the gist of it. Anyway, guys, I hope you enjoyed this tutorial. That is now wrapping it up. And hey, look at that. I didn't even use a vignette. So everyone out there that says, Andrew, you always use the vignette. Guess what? I didn't. What do you say to that? Anyway, so that wraps up the tutorial. This is the finished result again. No, that's not that one. That's, this is the finished result. Actually, I'm not sure which one. Yeah, this one probably still looks better. Anyway, it's, a lot of it is rather random, and it's quite a frustrating experience trying to set it up, trying to get the best looking ice. Really, it comes down to the shape of the ice as well as the environment. That's very, very important. Experiment with the displacement modifiers. That's going to affect, obviously, how bumpy and weird looking your ice looks. So all of these things very important. Hope you learned something from it. Hope it was fun for you guys. And luckily I finished it now because in 20 minutes I have to do an interview with the Blender podcast guys. So if you want to hear an interview with me by the time this tutorial is released, it's probably already up. So yeah, it's 1 hour again with me just talking randomly about stuff. Anyway, I hope you enjoyed this tutorial, guys. Leave a comment if you liked it. Otherwise, don't leave anything.